Morocco and Climate Change by Section 2, Team 1.
I'm Selena Bratz.
Julius Elia.
Jeffrey Ip.
知一流 Dunma.
And this is our presentation.
In the climate skeptics debate, the main consensus was that climate change was a legitimate issue and that it should be addressed by countries due to the new weather impacts affecting the countries in a negative way. Mainly, climate change causes vulnerabilities that far outweigh the opportunities, and countries will need to work together in order to solve the climate change issue.
Chapter 1. Morocco's Vulnerabilities and Opportunities of Climate Change. The first vulnerability, sea level rise. Hazard. Increase in global temperatures results in melting ice caps and an increase in sea level. Exposure. Populations living along the coast will be vulnerable to flooding and decrease in farmland. Sensitivity. Farmers, businesses, and the general population living across the coast are vulnerable to sea level rise. Ecological. Increase in sea level rise would affect farmland along the coast, decreasing the amount farmers are able to use. Economic. Flooding would affect the tourism industry along the coast as well as the coastal hotels. Social. Major flooding can affect some smaller cities and populations living close to the coast. Vulnerabilities. Drought. Hazard. Drought hazard has been increasing in Morocco during the present century because of low rainfall. Exposure. These prolonged droughts are increasing social degradation with desertification threatening 80% of land and soil erosion affecting nearly half of it. Sensitivity. Farmers are vulnerable. Ecological. With most farmland located in areas that receive less than 400
millimeters of rainfall each year, this has serious implications.
Political. It also demonstrates that drought is a major obstacle for agriculture and food security in the country, and new legislation is being made to help this. Economic. It can be observed that drought has considerable negative impacts on the economy and the people of Morocco in terms of crop production losses, reduction in GDP, and loss of livelihood. The third vulnerability, temperature increase. Hazard is an increase in global temperature will result in 3 to 30% decline in rainfall. Exposure. Population involved in agriculture will be vulnerable to a decrease in crop production and decrease in speed of crop production. Sensitivity. Farmers and the agriculture industry. Economic. Due to a decrease in rainfall, the agricultural productivity and economy will also decline. Social. With a decrease in rainfall and increase in temperature, farmers will have to adapt to new changes, thus changing their crop rotations and schedules. Ecological. A decrease in rainfall in some areas decreases the amount of land farmers are able to use. The next vulnerability, eroding coastlines. Hazard. An increase in sea levels will result in eroding coastlines for Morocco. Exposure. Populations living across the coast may have to change their lifestyle to adapt an eroding coastline and may even have to move from their homes because of this. Sensitivity. Population living along the coastlines. Social. Populations living near the coast will have to move away from their homes or change their lifestyle due to the eroding coast. Ecological. Eroding coastlines result in less land people are able to use. Economic. Tourism industry is affected as some Morocco beaches have already eroded away from rising sea levels. The next vulnerability, increased severity of extreme weather. Hazard. Climate change is causing increasingly more frequent and more intense extreme weather conditions like drought and flooding. Exposure. Population living in vulnerable areas or flooding or drought. Poor populations are unable to rebuild after extreme weather events, and also population living across the coast will be more susceptible to bigger floods. Sensitivity. Poor populations living near the coast. Economic. Farmers living near the coast may face more severe and frequent flooding and drought resulting in less agricultural productivity, decreasing economic gains. Social. If extreme weather gets out of hand for some areas, people in those areas may have to move away. Hard to do for poor people. Adaptations will need to be made for people more often from the extreme weather. Ecological. Some areas of land will be altered due to severe weather events, and some populations will move from lands affected from extreme weather events and the unpredictability some areas have with the weather. The next vulnerability is our increased salinity of aquifers. Hazard. Climate change events like increase in sea level is increasing levels of salinity in aquifers. Exposure. Populations living in rural areas and women will need to travel further to find clean water. Sensitivity. Women and populations living in rural areas. Social. People living in rural areas will have to change locations on where to attain water because their main water source may have increased salinity due to climate change. Ecological. Clean water supplies, now harder to find, are making clean water sources less available. Economic. Because climate change is making clean water more scarce, the value of clean water may increase. The final vulnerability, heavy rainfall. Hazard. Climate change increases more heavy rain in Morocco. Exposure. More heavy rainfall in Morocco has prompted authorities to issue high-level flood warnings. The severe weather has spread to affect parts of southern Spain, the Canary Islands, and Algeria. Sensitivity. People who live in the southern parts of Morocco are vulnerable to rainfall. Social. Moroccan Red Crescent Society and some local parts say that as many as 20,000 people were left without electricity, roads, and bridges destroyed, and hundreds of houses collapsed. Political. In response to the flood disaster, the Moroccan government has set up an interdepartmental command post in order to monitor the effects of the flooding, which include representatives from the Interior, Health, Infrastructure, Transport, and Environment, as well as representatives of the National Electricity and Water Office. Economic. According to GRF Davos research, flooding is by far the most costly of all hazards in Morocco. GRF Davos said that flooding causes around $0.44 billion in losses each year.
Climate change also brings some opportunities to Morocco. Climate change in Morocco has caused an increased salinity of aquifers. The Souss Mesa aquifer is one of the largest aquifer affected, being a key source of water to the entire Souss Mesa coastal plain. Women are greatly affected by this change in their daily lives because they are forced to travel great distance to find clean water used for drinking and other basic needs of life. For the political part, Morocco is joining with other African countries to lobby developed nations in Copenhagen. Economic part, they will be asking for money and sharing of technology to increase quality of life for women and the poor. For the social part, having these needs met with along Morocco to adapt better to the potentially devastating effects of climate change. So for the second opportunity, because of Morocco is facing serious problem on climate change, such as lack of resources, Morocco makes a great advance on improving the technology of dealing with climate change. Early this year, Morocco opened Noor 1. It will likely be the biggest solar plant in the world and provide energy for at least 1 million people with a 580 megawatt capacity. For the economic part, given that Morocco imports around 97% of its energy supply and possesses no oil or natural gases deposits of its own, the government has viewed developing renewable energy as the only way to ensure the country's continuing economic development. For the social part, this project helped to reduce the development gap between urban and rural areas. For the political part, exporting solar energy could have stabilizing effects within and between countries, according to Moroccan Solar Energy Agency. In the third opportunity, climate change is becoming a bigger issue around the world due to the rising sea levels and rise in global temperature. Morocco is selected to be the host country for an important climate change conference called COP22. Using COP22 conference to formally launch its adoption of African Agriculture Initiative. For the political part, this conference will grant Morocco a bigger role in helping climate change as well as their own country, as it will grant people in Morocco help from initiatives formed in the conference. For the ecological part, launching the adoption of African Agriculture Initiative will improve soil management and irrigation management. For the social part, people involved in agriculture will receive help from insurance programs for farmers affected by droughts.
Chapter 2: Involvement in Fossil Fuel Production and Deforestation.
Before Morocco was colonized, the country was fully independent and the economic was sluggish. The French farmers who immigrated to Morocco were much better than Morocco farmers. After the Industrial Revolution, the development of tourist industry also figured prominently in the plan. The 5-year plan goals were to increase production in agriculture. The connection between the past and the present economic was that since it is now not fully independent as it was back then, it receives help from other countries, and the similarity between the past and present is that agriculture is still a big part of the economic. Now let's talk about Morocco's history of fossil fuel burning. Fossil fuels account for about 68% of installed capacity in Morocco. Morocco's electricity generation grew by 6 to 7% per year between 2002 and 2012 to satisfy the demand. The main sources are fossil fuels. In the year 2003, an agreement on the use and import of alternative fuels was made. Fossil fuel energy consumption was 88.1%. The connection to global imperialism is that the imperialism, being defined as a country's power through diplomacy, can also be interpreted as countries' overpowering use of greenhouse gas emitting resources with no one stopping it. Morocco had gone decades with its heavy use of fossil fuels while increasing electricity generation drastically in the turn of the century. In this part, we will talk about Morocco's history of deforestation. Since Morocco has increasing populations and economic growth, the country is using more and more trees per year to support these changes. Between 1990 and 2010, the total loss of nature forest covers reduced by 71,000 hectares. Not only precipitation impacts deforestation, but also affect the biodiversity and protected regions indirectly. Morocco has more than 600 known species, and there are around 4% are endemic, which means they exist only in Morocco, and 4% of them are threatened. In regards to global imperialism and the history of deforestation, the country believed that increasing the forests would in turn decrease the power they had to continually increase the population and economic growth. To counteract the decrease in forest cover, Moroccans planted forests which between 1990 and 2010, the total net hectares of forest cover increased by 82,000 hectares.
Demographic, carbon footprint, and vulnerable populations.
Dominant lifestyle and carbon footprint. Morocco has a large rural population with over 44% of a total population of more than 31 million living in rural areas, which means they are highly dependent on natural resources such as agriculture and biomass energy. Average farm household incomes in some communities are as low as $540 per year. And since most of Morocco's population lives in rural areas, their income is influenced by changes in weather and they can do little to adapt to climate change. Climate change can erode the rural land and negatively commercial exchange, fishing, tourism, and development. The second part would be the climate change and vulnerable populations. Climate change affects women by forcing them to travel great distance in search for clean water. This change is due to the increased salinity of aquifers. Climate change affects people in poverty by strong storms washing over agricultural land. This leads to those in poverty losing all of the resources they need to grow crops to trade in the market in exchange for income, causing them to go deeper into poverty. Desertification and overgrazing has worsened water and wind erosion as well as increased soil salinity. This has caused the indigenous people of Morocco, like Berbers, to transition from their nomadic tribe culture to a more sedentary and urban lifestyle. And for the climate change affects farmers because of the severe water shortages throughout Morocco, which limits Moroccan farmers' time for growth and amount they can grow. In 2015, a severe drought caused the nation's economy to decline by 1.5%. And the areas of Morocco, such as water resources and agriculture, fish, and tourism, are where most of Morocco's vulnerable people are affected. Morocco is expected to dedicate at least 15% of this overall investment budget to adaptation to climate change in order to provide financial security to the populations affected the most. These adaptation policies will impact the vulnerable population positively as they will have financial security and a faster recovery time if a severe weather event occurs. The climate change actions and trade-offs. And for the actions, the first one would be expand on renewable energy, such as build more wind turbines. And the second one will be limiting farmers to how much fresh water they can use. And the third will be the government lifts or subsidies on diesel, gas, and oil to encourage more efficient use of energy. And the fourth would be protecting the environment in terms of agriculture as it employs 40% of Morocco's workforce. So for the cons, the first one will be cost a lot of money for the country to build these structures, and the second will be agriculture is then limited. And the third one will be gas prices or use of heavy fuel oil skyrocket. And the fourth one is agriculture only accounts for 15% of the country's GDP. And the last one will be less practical for farmers as they need to use energy for agriculture.
In the post-Paris role-play game, all the countries couldn't agree to one final solution, and we ran into obstacles such as geoengineering and financing. And so overall, because of that, we couldn't lead up to one plan that all countries would be satisfied with for any future climate change plans.
Chapter 3, Morocco's Past and Present Political Platform. Morocco's political platform with the international politics of the UNFCCC. With Morocco being vulnerable to climate change impacts such as floods, decreased rainfall, and erosion of the coast, Morocco takes a platform to reduce the impacts of climate change in order to protect its people and culture. According to the NDC, Morocco is consistent with limiting warming to below 2 degrees Celsius without requiring other countries to make much more reductions and comparably greater effort. Morocco fully supports the emission schemes in order to make the country's civilization more resistant to climate change, as well as to change to a low-carbon economy. In order to achieve this goal, Morocco plans on reducing greenhouse gases by 13% and an additional 19% under certain conditions, leading to a total reduction of greenhouse gases of 32% by 2030. In order to do so, Morocco requires an investment of $45 billion between 2015 and 2030. This money is conditioned upon international support from climate finance systems. Morocco believes that the global ambition to counter effects of climate change requires a commitment from all countries involved to work on mitigation, adaptation, and implementation of emission schemes. Evolution of Morocco's political platform. In 1992, the UNFCCC was adopted to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions and was signed by 154 nations, including Morocco. In 1997, COP3 held in Kyoto, Japan, where the Kyoto Protocol was signed by 150 countries, Morocco being one of them. The protocol was made to enhance the UNFCCC and lower emissions of the top 6 major GHGs. 2001 COP7 was held in Marrakesh, Morocco. Detailed rules of the Kyoto Protocol were brought together and were made into the Marrakesh Accords. Also, the SCCF was made to finance global projects relating to the CC. Morocco hosted a COP7 indicating they wanted more involvement in the UNFCCC, keeping their political platform stable and trying to reduce emissions in every country. 2015, COP21 launched the Paris Agreement, where Morocco signed this but also takes extra initiative into this idea. With all countries agreeing to lower their GHG emissions by 1.5% at this conference, Morocco takes an extra step by promising a reduction of 32% by 2030. 2016, COP22 is brought back to Morocco, where they launched the initiative called Adaptation of African Culture, which calls for improvement of soil management, water, and irrigation management for farmers who were affected by a recent drought. Practices the same political platform from the start, COP22 will allow Morocco to help other countries in their agriculture department and help them reduce emissions. The instances of Morocco's involvement. Number 1, Morocco's involvement in the INDC under the UNFCCC. The INDC was created during a national conference in Rabat in June of 2015. This conference was held to officially represent a draft of the INDC to all the stakeholders and get their support in implementing the INDC. The INDC plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Morocco by 32% by 2020. Since Morocco is completely involved in helping reverse the effects of climate change, the country wants to reduce greenhouse gases significantly to set an example for other countries and as an attempt for other countries to do the same. Number 2, in November of 2016, Morocco hosted COP22. Morocco's platform to help climate change when hosting COP22 was to bring together the 46 African nations involved at the conference and adopt their own idea to improve African agriculture. Their main goal was to persuade world leaders to sign up and create an outline on how to divide up the $100 billion promised to support adaptation and mitigation projects in developing countries. Morocco plans to do this because it believes to counter the effects of climate change, it requires a commitment from all countries to work together. Number 3. Because of the geographical location, Morocco is facing water shortage, desertification, floods, and sea level rising. Morocco plans to implement a sectoral approach for adapting the various environments, mountain regions, the agricultural areas, urban areas, oases, and the coast. To do this, they must adopt an adaptation policy. Number 4. The Plan Morocco, also known as the Agricultural and Changing Climate. The plan aims to protect the environment and the livelihoods of Moroccans as well. Morocco is betting on small farmers and investing in technology and research for more efficient cereal production techniques through the Green Morocco Plan. One solution being introduced is direct seeding technology, which is also known as conservation agriculture or no-tillage. This plan will hopefully boost the economy in Morocco without increasing fossil fuel consumption and also generate more money for investing in renewable energy technology. Number 5. Morocco has been following the UN Sustainable Goals for many years and is one of the few North African countries powering forward in the fight against climate change. In 2011, Morocco added the right to a healthy environment and sustainable development to its constitution. According to the 2006 Climate Change Performance Index, Morocco is ranked the world's 6th best country and is the only non-European country in the top 20. To add on, Morocco recently opened Noor 1, which is a solar power plant likely to be the biggest in the world when construction is finalized. The solar plant is likely to be the biggest in the world when completed in 2018, providing energy to at least 1 million people. This will lower emissions in Morocco to comply with the INDC, lowering emissions by 2030. Number 6. From October to November 2001, Morocco hosted COP7 that introduced the Marrakesh Accords. The set of agreements organized the rules of emission targets set in the Kyoto Protocol. This event wanted to limit all countries' emissions of GHGs so that no countries are surpassing limits set by the Kyoto Protocol. This again emphasizes the platform of countries working together to stop climate change from having adverse effects on the world.
According to the 2017 Intergen game, we can see that all the Generation 3 countries did not do too well. This is because all the Generation 1s and 2s produced more than they should have invested. So in this chapter, we would be talking about how Morocco will focus on investing in order to better all of the generations. Chapter 4, Recommendations for Moving Forward. Morocco's past politics and climate change. Morocco first started the fight against climate change back in 1992 when they adopted and signed the UNFCCC, along with 153 other nations in order to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. Their political platform with the UNFCCC was not only to reduce their emissions, but encourage other countries to do the same. After signing the Kyoto Protocol during COP3, Morocco hosted COP7, its first conference in 2001. Morocco discussed that they were still adamant about reducing gas emissions, but requested more involvement in the UNFCCC to lower greenhouse gases of the 6 major producers. In 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed with countries agreeing to lower their greenhouse gas emissions by 1.5%. Furthermore, Morocco took additional action and wanted to reduce emissions by 32% by 2030. A year later, Morocco took another initiative in their political platform and hosted COP22, where they launched the IAH to help African countries adapt to the effects of climate change. Morocco's future climate change plans. Morocco's goal with their political platform looking into the future will be beneficial for everything in their country, from agriculture to its oceans and coastline. Although it will cost a lot of money, Morocco plans on relying heavily on renewable energy, such as massive solar plants covering thousands of acres of deserts to reduce long-term carbon emissions by millions of tons. Since Morocco has been acting on reducing greenhouse gases in past political negotiations, Morocco will continue to act upon reducing the total greenhouse gas emissions on their country and support reversing effects of climate change that has already occurred. Future Climate Change Plans, Part 2. In future international climate change negotiations, Morocco should continue expanding on their plans of renewable energy. Morocco will most likely need investments from other countries to continue upgrading this technology. This boost in technology will reduce total greenhouse gas emissions without affecting the economy. Morocco should also support their agricultural industry and invest in technology that will increase agricultural productivity while reducing emissions. Morocco has gone into COP such as last year's as the leader in climate changing ideas and plans. Being a country with a very low emissions per capita rate, Morocco is a suitable leader in the climate change negotiations and should continue to influence other countries to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Financial cost for future generations. Morocco has spent $11.5 billion on wind and solar energy programs, and this country also spent $3.9 billion on NOR1. As the history record, we believe that Morocco will spend more money to deal with the climate change problems. As our recommendation, Morocco needs to expand the plans of renewable energy, which is just like NOR1 planned before. We chose this recommendation because Morocco's deserts are a perfect place for solar energy facilities. In addition, expanding renewable energy can reduce the dependent imports from other countries such as Saudi Arabia. Also, Morocco will create a plan called the Green Morocco Plan, which will increase GDP about 47 billion United States dollars equivalent, creating about 1.15 million jobs by 2020 and triple the economy for nearly 3 million farmers. In the long term, there will be negative impacts for Morocco from borrowing money from other countries, such as the US. Morocco will have to end up paying their debts plus interest in the long run. Another negative is that since Morocco's plan is to quickly switch to green energy, most of the country's money will go into investing in technology to support this instead of spending that money to increase productions for the short term. These benefits far outweigh the costs because with these new changes, Morocco will have far less greenhouse gas productions and at the same time boosting their economic status with better renewable energy technology. How recommendations will help vulnerable populations. Morocco's recommendations on investing in their agricultural industry will help farmers increase efficiency while decreasing emissions. Farmers rely on agriculture as their main source of income, so increasing technology will help farmers tremendously as well as boost the economy. The recommendation of reducing climate change impacts will help the vulnerable populations such as the indigenous people of Morocco. Since global climate change can lead to severe weather events which sometimes affect the indigenous people of Morocco, the Berbers, Morocco's recommendation to investing in plans to reduce and reverse the effects of climate change would stabilize the culture and lifestyle of the Berbers. This investment on reducing effects of climate change will also tremendously help the women and people in poverty as less severe weather events will allow these populations to grow quicker and lessen the struggles they face from the impacts of climate change. These recommendations are the right thing to do because it will improve the lives of all vulnerable populations and protect them from future climate change impacts. In conclusion, Morocco is a country with more vulnerabilities than opportunities due to climate change and has always been a country that did not rely heavily on fossil fuels or producing large amounts of greenhouse gases in order to thrive. In fact, Morocco has been a country that has been actively trying to reverse and reduce the effects of climate change, even hosting a COP22 conference. Morocco started with a political platform of trying to reduce greenhouse gases around the world and has stayed consistent with that platform. Morocco plans on investing in renewable energy technology and expanding eco-friendly technology for farmers, as agriculture is a big part of Morocco's economy. With new adaptation plans and mitigation plans with large solar plants producing energy for the country, the vulnerable populations of the indigenous Berbers and women will benefit greatly. Overall, Morocco will continue with the present political platform and attempt to convert to a country that will greatly rely on renewable energy sources as well as influence other countries to do the same.